Good morning and aloha, everybody. I want to thank Senator Blumenthal for joining this fight against the public charge rule, and to everyone else who is here today, and especially our other speakers. Especially, as I'd like to acknowledge the representatives from CLASP, the Center for Law and Social Policy. Thank you. Raise your hands. The Asian and Pacific Islander American Health Forum, and the National Immigration Law Center for joining us. These are organizations dedicated to serving immigrants and understand how devastating and harmful the public charge rules change will be. And since Donald Trump took office, it seems like he and the administration try to come up with at least one cruel thing they can do to immigrants every single day. In 2017, he started with the Muslim ban. He ended DACA, threatening 800,000 participants with potential deportation. He systematically separated children from their parents at the southern border. He's terrorized asylum seekers with his dangerous Remain in Mexico policy and asylum ban. He called for basically a complete end to migration to our country, saying in California, I quote, "We can't take you anymore. Our country is full," end quote. He even proposed deporting migrants seeking life-saving medical treatment in the United States, and we all know about that incident and what's going on there. And last month, the administration issued its final public charge rule. Our country has always made decisions about who can come into our country and who can stay permanently in our country. But this change, this expansion of the public charge rule, as I said, vastly expands the basis on which the administration can keep people out of our country and prevent people from staying in our country using factors such as age, wealth, education, skills, health, family size, or ability to speak English. It allows the Trump administration to deny green cards and visas to immigrants if they receive even a small amount of public assistance or look like they might use it. That's a huge amount of discretionary power to our immigration authorities. If they think that you might access these kinds of benefits, they can deny you what you want. And this would, of course, disproportionately harm immigrants who aren't wealthy, highly educated, or speak English. To support the fiction that this rule is even necessary, the Trump administration is falsely arguing that immigrants only come to the United States to go on welfare. This is particularly cruel, offensive, and it is a lie. Most immigrants aren't even eligible for federal public benefits unless they meet certain criteria, such as being a green card holder for at least 5 years. So you have to be in our country for 5 years before you can, for so many people, before you can even access these kinds of services. They do not come here to get on the dole. But that's a myth and a lie that's being perpetrated by the Trump administration for any number of anti-immigrant things that they are doing. So that a true effect, and therefore the true intent behind the administration's public charge rule, is to create a climate of fear among immigrant families, and sadly, it's working. I've heard from a number of hardworking taxpayer immigrants in Hawaii, and by the way, Hawaii has a very high percentage of immigrants, probably more so than many, many other states. And many of the immigrants in Hawaii are not even subject to the public charge rule, but who are nevertheless afraid to see their doctor or access essential services. One woman, a legal permanent resident who has lived in the United States for over 20 years and accepted SNAP benefits to feed her children at one point, shared her fear with me of applying for citizenship because of this rule, even though it doesn't apply to her. Another woman, also a permanent resident, shared how her husband was afraid to purchase health care on the exchange for fear that it would prohibit him from applying for citizenship. And with so many Trump administration attacks on immigrant families, the cruelty and the fear are the point. The rule would have blocked many of us. Well, it certainly would have blocked me because I came to this country, I didn't know a word of English. It would have blocked our parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents from coming into this country or staying here. And it will inflict real harm not only on immigrants seeking green cards, but also on their U.S. citizen children and state and local economies and the services that the states and local economies provide. And so you don't have to take our word for it. The Department of Homeland Security admitted as much in the rule itself. They said that the rule, quote, may decrease disposable income and increase poverty of certain families and children, including U.S. citizen children, end quote. The department also acknowledged that the public charge rule could result in reduced revenue for healthcare providers, grocery stores, and farmers. So no wonder states like Hawaii, Illinois, Connecticut, cities like San Francisco, Santa Clara, Washington, D.C., are suing to block the rule, and why hundreds of thousands of Americans wrote comments in opposition to the rule. And at times like these, we must reaffirm our values as a country. And that's why today, I, along with my colleagues, we're introducing the Protect American Values Act. This bill would block the public charge rule from being enforced, from being implemented. Even Republican opponents of immigration have acknowledged that with the exception of our original peoples, everyone came from somewhere else. We all have immigrant roots. The public charge rule and the administration's anti-immigrant policies reject this fundamental American fact that most of us came from somewhere else. So instead of harming immigrant families seeking a better life, our bill protects them. Our bill keeps families together, and our bill supports the rich diversity that it has enabled our country to thrive and excel throughout our history. So I'm proud that so far, 26 of my colleagues support this legislation, and of course I will continue working towards passing it. And it would be nice if my Republican colleagues, who all acknowledge that but for the original peoples we all came from elsewhere, that they would sign on too. Because this public charge rules change will hurt their constituents. So I now turn to Senator Blumenthal to provide his remarks.
Thank you. I'm very proud to stand with Senator Hirono of Hawaii, which is about as far from Connecticut as you can possibly be geographically.
We're on the page, however.
But we are bringing the country together. All of the states, all of our colleagues in between Hawaii and Connecticut. And I am a longtime admirer of Senator Hirono's tenacity and advocacy on immigration issues and on so many others as well. And what we share, despite our geographic differences, is an immigrant story. Neither of us would be here if this rule existed when we were born. Neither of us would be here in the United States, let alone in the United States Senate. My dad came to this country in 1935. He was 17 years old. He spoke no English. He had not much more than the shirt on his back, and he knew no one. He was alone, escaping persecution as a refugee, as an asylum seeker, to the United States of America. Nobody loved this country more than my dad. And I think often of how ashamed and embarrassed he would be today, seeing the betrayal of American values in this rule and so many other changes in law and policy that this administration is advocating. The public charge rule would have kept my father out of this country, as would many of the other new initiatives of this administration, designed not to improve the immigration system, but simply stop people from seeking freedom and opportunity here. I often go to the Statue of Liberty in traveling through New York. I see it when I fly here. And I took my children, all 4 of them, to see it, as well as Ellis Island, where my father entered this country. Immigration is not just an American tradition and value, it is what makes this country great. In fact, the greatest country in the history of the world. The immigrants that this rule seeks to bar from this country are potentially the source of scientists and teachers and doctors and many others in a nation that thrives on diversity. My father lacked the education, the resources, the knowledge of English that would be required under this rule. He would be potentially dependent, even though he never received a dime of public assistance or any kind of health care or any other benefit. But this rule applies blinders that focus our nation in exactly the wrong direction. The purpose of the rule is not to secure our borders or reduce public spending. It is about starving children to advance a xenophobic, anti-immigrant agenda. It is designed not to improve our country, but to make it smaller. And we will be a smaller nation. Already, I see the same fear in the communities of Connecticut that is evident in Hawaii and across this country. It is a fear that is engendered by this cruel and brutal set of policies that betray American values. It is a fear of seeking essential services like medical care, about taking kids to school. Is that a public service that could possibly lead to exclusion? It is a fear of providing food and nurturing that are necessary for strong communities to thrive. The fact is that 1 in 7 adults in immigrant families have already started avoiding public benefits, even though they may be legally entitled to them. They are deterred from seeking services and benefits that by law they are entitled to receive. Fear, cruelty, brutality. That's this administration's approach to immigration. And as a result of these policies, we will be a smaller and a lesser nation. We have a responsibility to speak up and to act. Congress cannot be complicit. We cannot allow Congress to be complicit in these policies. I want to thank again Senator Hirono and all of the groups that are such effective advocates and who are helping that lady who stands in the New York Harbor to keep that light alive. We are going through a dark and dangerous period in this country's history, and we must keep that light alive. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll hear from Olivia Golden, who is the Executive Director of CLASP. She's an expert in child and family programs, particularly for low-income families. CLASP, along with the other organizations here today, have been important partners in fighting the public charge rule.
Thank you so much, Senator Hirono, Senator Blumenthal. It's an honor to be here today. As you heard, I'm Olivia Golden, the Executive Director of the Center for Law and Social Policy, and we have the honor of co-chairing with the National Immigration Law Center the Protecting Immigrant Families campaign. So that means I'm here to speak on behalf of almost 400 organizations that are united in fighting against this rule and fighting for access by immigrants and their families to health, to nutrition, and to other core supports. We are so grateful to Senator Hirono for her leadership on behalf of immigrant families, and to Senator Hirono, Senator Blumenthal, and their more than 24 colleagues who've co-sponsored this important legislation. We're also deeply appreciative of the hundreds of members of Congress and their staffs who've stood beside us over the past 2 years as we've been fighting all steps of this terrible policy. It's a fight that's not over yet. Let me add just a little to the eloquent remarks that you heard from the senators about why this rule is so terrible. The public charge regulation, as you've heard, is counter to who we should be as a nation. The idea behind it is to make wealth a key criterion, not family, not work, for who can contribute to America, and to place white and wealthy immigrants ahead of immigrants of color and working families. For the first time, the rule creates a test favoring the wealthy in deciding who can stay in the U.S. Like Senator Blumenthal, my mother came from Germany in the 1930s, my father from Eastern Europe in the 1920s. That test would not have allowed them in, and it's not who we should be as a nation. In fact, what's behind the rule is not evidence, it's not reasoning, it's the Trump administration's commitment to attacking immigrants, especially immigrants of color, and at the same time, and we see this all the time at CLASP, the administration's commitment to attacking working people and the programs that help them in favor of those who are wealthy. The rule is also designed, as you've heard, to sow fear and confusion. It means that millions of families will choose between what they need, health, nutrition, housing, and the people they love, and this has already started to happen. Just last week, the U.S. Census Bureau reported that the insurance rate for children has gone down for the first time significantly, and including a significant reduction in insurance coverage for Hispanic children. And experts believe this rule is a major cause. That means that the health of citizen children and our public health are already at risk because of this rule. And the rule is lawless. The final regulation ignores more than 250,000 comments that the government was supposed to take into account, comments that came from children's advocacy groups, healthcare providers, states, cities, and importantly, members of Congress. These comments pointed out that the regulation totally ignores the evidence, that it ignores the economic burdens on states and cities, and that it ignores the will of Congress. The Senate has, as many members pointed out in their comments on the proposed regulation, the Senate has discussed public benefits and immigration policy many times, all the while leaving public charge in its pre-existing form. So I am thrilled to be here with Senator Hirono and our nonprofit partners to commit to fighting back together. The Protecting Immigrant Families campaign stands with the 26 senators who've endorsed this bill in Congress. We stand with immigrant families and with the hundreds and thousands of organizations and state and city leaders that are planning to fight for them. And as Sonia will explain on behalf of the National Immigration Law Center and our whole coalition, we are already taking the fight straight to the courts. So we're proud to stand with all of you to do what is best for the country, which is to repeal this deeply damaging rule and ensure that every family has what they need to thrive. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Kathy Chin, who is President and CEO of the Asian and Pacific Islander American Health Forum. Kathy is a leader of the AAPI community and will share how harmful the public charge rule is for AAPI families.
Thank you, Senator Hirono. Thank you so much for your leadership and for being such a fierce champion in the Senate for immigrants and for, in particular, this bill. I also want to thank Senator Blumenthal for joining you on the bill, as well as the other 26 senators. And I really want to acknowledge Olivia and Maria Elena Hincapi, who are the executives of the two co-chairs of the Protecting Immigrant Families, and thanks, Sonia, for being here to speak as well. Again, I am Kathy Cochin. I'm the president and CEO of the Asian and Pacific Islander American Health Forum. Also, I am a child of immigrants. And my father, my late father, always told us how he came to this country with only $36 in his pocket. 96 years later, when he passed away, he had trained scores and scores of electrical and biomedical engineers, and he has been deemed a pioneer in the biomedical engineering field. None of this would have happened if there had been this public charge rule applied in this way 90 years ago. So we at the Health Forum work with a network of about 100 community partners in 32 states as well as across the Pacific, and have been advocating for the health of Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders for over 30 years. This public charge rule is deeply harmful for Asian American and Pacific Islanders, and broadly for all communities of color. Over 1.4 million AAPI immigrants live in families that receive Medicaid or CHIP, the Children's Health Insurance Program, and many of them are scared, as we've all spoken about. They have begun to disenroll from public health insurance and are also really fearful about applying in the future, all because of this fear. The administration claims to be trying to encourage self-sufficiency among immigrants, but how can someone hope to succeed in supporting themselves and their families if they cannot meet their basic needs, including their basic medical needs? Many of the Health Forum's community partners have helped low-wage workers and their families enroll in health insurance through the Affordable Care Act as well as Medicaid, but report reluctance and fear to this because of this rule. For example, Nizreen, a client of Hope Clinic in Houston, Texas, came in for assistance accessing prenatal care when she was 6 months pregnant. She asked Hope staff if she can enroll in the ACA and not Medicaid coverage because of her fears of losing her immigration status under public charge. Hope staff were able to guide Nizreen through her options, addressing her fears, and due to their help, she did get the Medicaid coverage that she deserved. Family visas are at the core of our immigration system, as whole families are able to support each other and thrive. 40% of family-based visa immigrants are from Asia and the Pacific Island nations. Public charge means that families who use nutrition assistance programs, like the parents of Tuan Nguyen did as he grew up in the 1970s, who otherwise are unwelcome under this public charge rule. Today, Tuan is a successful businessman and a former executive director of the MQVN Community Development Corporation, which is helping Louisiana communities continue to recover from the long-term harm caused by Katrina and the Deepwater Horizon oil disaster. Yet, this administration assumes that those like him would be a burden. We have fought against the rule along with our partners at the Protecting Immigrant Families Coalition because we know that the diversity of background and experience is what makes our country great. This legislation is needed to block the administration's persistence in implementing not only this rule, but a whole program of anti-immigrant policies. Despite the record that shows that the overwhelming majority of the 260,000 comment letters that went in about the public charge rule oppose the rule. Just in the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander community alone, we had 23,000 comment letters, which were under the banner of the hashtag #OneNation campaign. They shared personal stories of how their families were able to survive and thrive through support from public programs, their love of our country, and the data on the disproportionate negative impact on communities of color and the harm that it will do. So thank you, Senator Hirono, for your leadership with so many of the other senators. We hope that more join you in introducing this important legislation that stands with immigrant families. Your leadership in defending families is really fulfilling the opportunity and promise of our country. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Finally, we will hear from Sonia Schwartz, a senior policy attorney from the National Immigration Law Center. She has been fighting for healthcare access and against poverty for nearly 20 years, and she'll talk about the Trump administration's attacks on immigrants.
Thank you,
Sonia?
Senator Hirono. I'm honored to be here today and join other close advocates for immigrant rights and access to health care. But first, I just wanted to thank Senator Hirono for her leadership on this bill and so many others as well. I also wanted to quickly mention the companion bill that Congresswoman Chu introduced at the House, which is really the companion to this Hirono bill. As some of you already know, the National Immigration Law Center and other organizations, including attorneys generals, including counties, including advocates and organizations that represent immigrant families around the country, have filed suit to block this immoral and hate-filled rule, the public charge rule. But we filed suit because we know the law is on our side. We also know that Donald Trump, Stephen Miller, and Ken Cuccinelli don't let the law stand in the way of their hatred-fueled agenda. And we know that this fight that we're fighting is actually bigger than public charge. His attack on immigrant families, from the public charge regulation to family separation to trying to block and end birthright citizenship, and so many other assaults, are not only about building an actual border wall. They're actually also about building an invisible wall inside our country that sends families of color one very clear message. If you're not white and you're not wealthy, you're not welcome here in America. And that's why this legislation that Senator Hirono is leading is so critical, and why we at the National Immigration Law Center, along with other advocates here and many of the members of the Protecting Immigrant Families campaign, strongly support the legislation. We think that Congress needs to act very quickly and very decisively to send Trump an equally clear message, which is basically that you don't get to define who belongs here in this country. The other message is that we want to make it clear that the promise of a better life here in the United States is not one that's only for the Millers, the Cuccinelli, and the Trumps. That was the family name of Trump when they came here. It's actually for the Hironos, it's for the Blumenthals, it's for the Goldens, it's for the Kochins, and it's even for the Schwartzes and for my mom's family, the Atias, who came here one generation ago. The true exceptionalism of America is the idea that a person's character defines them and not the color of their skin or what their credit score looks like. To the members of Congress who spoke out against the public charge regulation last year, we're so thankful, and we definitely had hundreds that commented against the rule. But there's also another message that Senator Hirono understands. This is a time for action. Comments were great, a great first step, but now it's time to co-sponsor this legislation. Denouncing Trump's atrocities is not enough. You actually have to do something. You have to act. And leadership means stopping them, and co-sponsoring the Protecting American Values Act is a really important aspect of that work. I just wanted to close for 1 minute. My colleagues have said it all, just with a message for the millions of immigrant families out there who are worried and who the public charge rule, in addition to all the other attacks, is making them feel very fearful and worried about the future for their children. I just want to say that we're fighting for you in the courthouse right now. Our hearing is coming up on October 2nd in California. Senator Hirono, Senator Blumenthal, their colleagues here on Capitol Hill, governors around the country, and mayors on the country are all fighting for you. And for most families, the best thing you can do right now is to keep taking your children to the doctor, taking them to school, making sure they have a healthy meal, and tucking them in a safe home and kissing them goodnight every night for now. Together, all of us can stop Trump and win the fight to protect immigrant families. And thank you again to Senator Hirono.
Thank you to all of my colleagues who have signed on, to all of you who are here. It's very clear that just about every time this administration makes a decision or the president issues an executive order, there is a lawsuit that follows. So all of these advocacy groups, hundreds, thousands all across the country, are using their resources to fight back. And you know, it's really important that our courts remain independent, even as Trump would like nothing better than to people the courts, the federal courts at the district, circuit, and of course the Supreme Court level, with people who are ideologically on their side. So court packing is going on, and it's going to have a massive effect with these judges with lifetime appointments, not only on the lawsuits that are currently in the pipeline, but on other lawsuits that will protect our individual rights, LGBTQ rights, voting rights, health care, unions organizing, all of these are going to go through the federal court system, which are being rapidly packed with Trump appointees. So, I want to make that point because it is really important that people get the connect the dots aspect of what is going on. And I want to thank you, Sonia, for that very reassuring message, but we have to fight back. And so now, if any of you have any questions, we'll be happy to respond. Okay, we are so convincing you have no questions. Okay, let's go out there. No questions? All right.
Oh, Senator, I have
Yes.
sorry. What are the chances that any of your Republican colleagues are actually going to support it? Because, as you said earlier, a lot of them understand that this
Yes.
is just against the basics of this country. So is this finally one agreement that you can all come to with this topic?
What do you think? Sadly, when we were doing the comprehensive immigration reform in 2013, I was very much a part of that. And senator after senator, all these Republican senators came to the floor talking about their immigrant roots and blah, blah, blah. And then they vote against it. You see, so that's what's happening. And as long as the Republicans are going to adhere to what President Trump wants and his agenda, they are not going to stand with us. And that is why elections matter. But I believe that people are becoming very mobilized about the dangers that confront us from this administration's decisions and their priorities, and they will respond accordingly. And that is my hope. And that's why even if this bill is going to have an uphill battle, it is really important for us to lay down that marker. Every time Donald Trump does something that is cruel, basically inhumane, and divisive against immigrants, we are going to fight back. Our voices will continue to be raised, and that's really important to give just that sense of we're in this together to the millions of people in our country and their families who are going to be impacted negatively by not just this rule, but just about everything else that this administration is doing. Thank you for the question. Okay, mahalo, everyone. Aloha.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Senator.
Thank you
The
so
battles
much.
continue.